Hey, I am Philip Braddock. I am the portfolio management lead at Atlassian Ventures. But more to the point, I'm here talking to you today, Robert.
Awesome. So I'm Robert Heen. I'm one of the Atlassian creators. I don't get to work for Atlassian, but I get to work with a lot of them. I get to talk to a lot of people who work there and learn a lot about it, including Philip. So, I guess just what is Atlassian Ventures? I have a bit of background, but I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there who they hear Atlassian Ventures and go, don't know what that is. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question, and I think it's a great jumping off point for us. So for everyone listening, Atlassian Ventures is Atlassian's corporate venture capital fund, and we invest in other companies in order to grow the Atlassian ecosystem. Or maybe a better way to say that is the fund exists to seed more development in the Atlassian ecosystem. We typically do that in two different types of companies. One are companies launching apps directly on the Atlassian marketplace, so you can think of that as a very linear ecosystem, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And the more multidimensional ecosystem would be companies who are integrating with Atlassian's products through APIs. So we want the ecosystem to be as mature and robust as possible so that if a customer hits a wall with our product, metaphorically speaking, we want to invest in the extensibility pillar of Atlassian so that customers can stay in Atlassian tools but still leverage other important tools that are part of their workflows in order to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish.
All right, so if there's like a niche or a smaller area maybe that Atlassian proper hasn't developed out yet or customers have identified, your group would go find companies, individuals, whatever they could develop into that to support the customers, the overall platform.
Absolutely. What we really try to focus on is symbiotic value to the mutual end customer. So not only are we going out and trying to find founders and executives at startups and early stage companies, but we also have an application process. So you can certainly check out more about us on Atlassian.com/ventures, and we can certainly chat a little more about that as we go on.
Awesome. We'll put that link, right here at the bottom for you.
Sounds good.
I just think symbiotics, like you're not like parasitic.
No, quite the opposite. No, but that's like we really tried long and hard to figure out the best way to describe sort of what we're doing, and that's really it. So we're always focusing on that value, sort of the intersection of value between the early stage companies in which we're investing, Atlassian as a business, us as the venture fund at Atlassian, and most importantly, the mutual end customer. So you hit the nail on the head. If one of our products does not do fill in the blank, either because we haven't built that yet or because it's never going to do that, we want to go and find companies who are integrating with our products or launching apps on top of our products through the marketplace to make sure that the use cases that our customers have can be fulfilled, and that if it makes sense for us to go and then seed that development, we're actively doing that.
All right, so you mentioned someone could apply. I could pop open that website, punch in an application, and then I assume Ventures would review it to figure out a fit.
Yep.
Or
yeah, that's exactly right. So Atlassian Ventures is the tip of the spear in that conversation. The easiest way to say it is if there's no Atlassian angle to what you're working on, chances are it's not a fit for us. I'm not here to say that means you can't find an investor anywhere, but we have a particularly Atlassian-focused investment thesis, for obvious reasons.
Makes sense.
So that's right. So we would go through the application. If we think that there is some signal there, and if we think that there's some differentiation compared to other things we've seen, we likely set up an introductory call, learn a little bit more, and then we go through a multi-step process to determine if it makes sense for us to invest or not. From sort of first conversation until we would formally invest and we had sent or deployed the capital would be sort of the venture term, and then you are formally in the portfolio. So our process at a minimum typically requires an introductory call with someone on the ventures team, probably a couple back and forth emails to clarify some things, then at least one other product deep dive or demo call where ventures would be on the call, but the primary audience for that call is less Atlassian Ventures and more a subject matter expert at Atlassian. So it could be someone on a product team, it could be a domain expert like in the security space, for example, or something like that. From there, if that goes well, we would continue our diligence process, which is mostly asynchronous, I would say. And then we do put together formal investment memos that have to get formally approved by an internal investment committee. So while there can be additional calls, additional steps in there, at a high level, those are really the beats that we hit across the board.
All right, and let's say you get an application that looks great. What's the general or average timeline that would take?
Yeah, good question. I'd say from point of application to actually deploying capital in the companies in which we invest, I'd say we're looking at maybe about a month, soup to nuts. And that's on average. There have been times we've moved quicker than that if we need to, if there's a big round coming together, for example. And sometimes it's taken longer. But longer is not so much, I wouldn't say, if it's taking longer, it's because we're still going through our process. It's not because we're trying to move intentionally slow or anything like that. Sometimes these processes also have fits and starts. you'll meet a founder or a set of founders, think there's something there, and then they will come back to you and say, hey, we're actually going to pause our fundraising efforts for a little bit, and then maybe we'll restart them in a couple months or something like that. So I'd say each deal is unique, but we definitely do our best to turn things around within weeks, not months, and certainly not quarters.
Or years.
Yes, definitely not years. No, absolutely not.
All right. And you mentioned, a team. How many people are at Atlassian Ventures helping?
Two. So we are,
so you are half the team.
Yes, and by definition, I think that is the smallest team you could have. I think if you agree with the supposition that a team is more than one person, we have the smallest possible team we could have.
So I guess on a personal level, how did you get involved with AV?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking. So I've been at Atlassian almost 9 years. I actually started there when I was a graduate student, and I have been lucky enough to grow with Atlassian over that near 9 years as well. I have been on the Ventures team, to your question, Robert, for coming up, or just been 2 years now. And it was a little bit of a right place, right time kind of thing. So prior to this at Atlassian, I was the chief of staff to our CFO, who is now retired. And when I was working for him, he told me he was going to retire. So there was this impetus that I wouldn't say that my hand was forced to find a new role at Atlassian, but it seemed as though it was sort of the logical thing to do. And at that point in time, the Ventures fund existed, but there was no Ventures team. And so I was one of the first two people to come on and really build out the team. And part of why we needed it at that time was we had made maybe a dozen investments or so, but there wasn't a whole bunch of programmatic or scalable support for the companies in the portfolio. So part of my job was not only to continue to look at some of our earliest stage investments, notably in the marketplace, the Atlassian marketplace that is, but also really figure out how do we support not just each company in the portfolio, but how do we do things so that we have sort of pattern recognition and we can do sort of these operational experiments, for lack of a better way to describe it, to ensure that we are doing our best at all times to provide the most value to the companies in our portfolio. And in that sense, from a portfolio support perspective, value does not mean the capital we deploy or the money we invest. It means really trying to figure out and help companies get the most out of Atlassian. So that might mean introductions to senior leaders. It might mean sort of getting folks quicker answers on tickets or something like that they might not. And then of course there are a whole host of perks and services that we're constantly evaluating and experimenting with to ensure that companies really do feel like they're getting value from us as an investor.
You mentioned experiments twice. How do you experiment on these folks?
It's a good question on the experimentation. Yeah. So it's not so much experimenting with the companies as much as experimenting with sort of programs and offerings. So for example, one thing that did not exist when I came into my role over 2 years ago was any sort of exclusivity or preferential treatment on the Atlassian marketplace. Now, any company in our Atlassian Ventures portfolio who has at least one app in the marketplace is part of an exclusive collection, that's the word on the marketplace, called Atlassian Ventures. So that's an idea of, that's what I mean, for example, when I say experiment. We are sort of looking at different ways, physical, digital, everything in between, where we can offer more value and not just differentiate ourselves as a corporate venture investor, but also make sure that the companies really feel as though we are providing more than just the capital. Because if you do believe that the capital is fungible, meaning, if you give me $10 or someone else gives me $10, I have $10 one way or the other. So we try to really figure out what are the sort of symbiotic mutual value add services that we can provide as investors. And so that's where a lot of the experimentation comes in. It's on the portfolio support side. It's not really on the actual investment. And certainly not even on the investment process side either. Maybe we'll tweak one or two things as part of our workflow, but no, it's much more about trying to sort of launch or offer thing X, see if it's being taken advantage of. If it is, great, maybe we double down. If it's not, no big deal. We try to remain agile. So we offer a variety of perks and services as part of being in the portfolio. I've already mentioned some of them. Some of them might be as discreet as, hey, can you please help facilitate a warm introduction to a senior leader at Atlassian?
Access to people.
You got it, exactly. Yeah. Knowledge, people, sort of fast track, that kind of stuff. But where we are really trying to explore and dive deeper are figuring out what are some things that are a bit more esoteric, for lack of a better way to say it, that take a bit more operational support to get off the ground. So for example, Atlassian's annual conference team is coming up in a couple months. There will be an Atlassian Ventures booth there. And the booth is not really for us as ventures to be out there sort of quote unquote selling ourselves into the ecosystem, we actually have 6 identical kiosks, and we will bring in 30 portfolio companies, each of whom gets a 4-hour shift. So they get to use this scaffold that is the booth to really sell themselves to Atlassian customers and just raise awareness about themselves as companies. And so in that sense, that's something that didn't exist 3 years ago and has gotten better and more mature and more robust every year since. So this will be the 3rd year in a row that we're offering that, for example.
Yeah, so it's not even access to a resource or technical data about Atlassian. It's, hey, we're going to get you and your team at team.
Yes.
April 30th to May 3rd. May 3rd or May 2nd. I'll be there.
Yeah. Me too.
So they could be out in front of people at a booth just as Atlassian Ventures.
You got it. And so in that sense, I would say that what we're, the experiment there is sort of how do we provide preferred placement, exclusive placement, something like that. Exclusive is maybe not the best word there, but preferred placement in both physical and digital arenas where Atlassian is the organizer.
So you mentioned you've got all these, companies in the portfolio. Are there successful exits?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for anyone who's not familiar with that terminology, an exit for a privately held early stage company would basically mean either being acquired or going public. So we have actually had successes in both in our portfolio. I don't know that necessarily the point of our conversation is to go into too much detail, but on our website, you can go to Atlassian.com/venture, see all the companies in our portfolio, and then we actually have 2 different tabs where you can see the ones that have gone public or IPO, and then you can see the ones who've been acquired as well.
All right. And you mentioned that website earlier, wanting to talk about it. Do you want to dig into some about what's in there? Or?
Sure, absolutely. So the Atlassian Ventures website, Atlassian Ventures, Atlassian.com/ventures is kind of broken up into 4 bite-sized pages. There's a homepage where we sort of describe the purpose of what we do. We also link out to some content as a wink and a hat tip to Atlassian's corporate value, open company, no BS. We actually have publicly published the 2 different contracts we use when we do investments. One typically for earliest stage companies, the other for slightly later, or what you might know as growth stage companies. And we do that to minimize friction in our investment process, and also frankly to come to the table very transparently. And so in that sense, that's some of the kind of stuff that is on the website. We also have a portfolio companies page, so you can see all the companies and outlink to their websites. We have a whole host of FAQs that answer questions not only about our investment process, but some of the questions you've asked here, Robert, like what are some of the perks, what are some of the advantages, what kind of timeline can I expect, things like that nature. And if I'm not mistaken, the 4th bite-sized page is a little bit about our team. So some pictures, some LinkedIn profiles and stuff like that. And then there's...
About 2 of them, I imagine?
Yeah, technically. Well, there are 2 of us full-time, and then we report up through Corp Dev. So the head of Corp Dev at Atlassian is included on there as well, because she helps out quite a bit with the work we do.
Like 50% more people right there.
That's a great point. Yeah, I suppose that's totally fair. Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
Cool.
So the last thing on the website, not the last thing, one other thing that's on there which is really important is anyone who's interested in exploring funding can actually apply through the website. So there's a very clear call to action, apply. I think it just says apply. And you fill out a web form, and then, as we talked about, we would then go ahead and review that in a timely fashion and go from there.
Gotcha. You mentioned you publish the contracts. I imagine the templates used.
That's
I imagine
exactly
that's not a very common thing.
Not that we've seen. I don't want to say we're the only people who have done it, but years ago, I want to say maybe about 5 or 6 years back now, Atlassian's M&A team did do something that was pretty groundbreaking. They actually published publicly Atlassian's M&A term sheet. And that was something that we took great inspiration from when I joined the Ventures team. We wanted to have, to your point, these templates out there so that when people come to the table, especially if we have an inclination that we have a desire to invest, whether or not it works out, of course, you have to go through the process. But if we have that inclination, we like to make sure that founders explicitly get those links from us early on in the process. It gives them, potentially even if they're working with lawyers, an opportunity to really pre-review those. And if there are going to be some hang-ups, we'd much rather talk about those openly and honestly as early as possible, rather than kind of get to quote-unquote the 11th hour and it's a whole bunch of red lines going back and forth in a contract. So for us, we feel it's not only more efficient, but we do feel that it is, as I mentioned, very aligned to the way Atlassian tries to operate as transparently as possible, both with a customer and internally as well.
Interesting. Yeah, nothing I've heard or seen before. Usually, interviewing for a job, you never see any of the contracts, any of the agreements until please sign this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, obviously it's not a job interview, but yes, your point is very well taken. So we have both of those on there, and I see no reason why we would ever take those down. Maybe they would, get tweaked every now and then. Of course, there are contracts, so they are just templates on there. But fundamentally, if we do invest, the contract you would receive that has your name, your signature block, etc., is going to at least start out as a carbon copy of the template you'll see online.
Mm-hmm.
As corporate investors, as opposed to institutional venture investors, we do not ask for board seats nor board observer seats when we invest in companies. And so in that sense, we really do see ourselves, less trying to get a quote unquote controlling interest in a company and more just being sort of an investor, a thought partner, and then depending on how deep a company goes with Atlassian, really continuing to accelerate and grow that partnership from a B2B perspective.
Yeah, you took the word out of my mouth, partnering with them instead of controlling and directing them.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's certainly right. We are investors, so I do think that's an important point to state. It's not just surface level by any means. We are on the cap tables. We do have ownership percentages in companies, but we are not here trying to own any of these companies outright. Not as investors. Atlassian, of course, has its M&A process, and that's separate and discrete from Atlassian Ventures. But we really do see it as, yes, we really do see it as a partnership.
All right, so looking forward to 2024. Besides Team 24, anything else going on the venture side that or anywhere on the Atlassian side that you're excited about?
Ventures is going to continue to stay active, so that's exciting. But if I take a step back, what I'm really excited about is to continue to support the awesome founders in our portfolio. That is by far the most fun part of the job. It's not to say it's always easy and it's not always sunny days. But really continuing to build those relationships and understand how I, in my role, and how Ventures overall, both as a fund and a quote program within Atlassian, can continue to support that mutual value add to the end customer. That's what we're here to do, and so every day that's exciting for me.
Yeah. I guess any advice to someone who has, whether they're solo or part of a group, and they're thinking of partnering with Ventures or going out on their own, any advice you would share with them on how to approach working with someone like AV or other groups?
Yeah. I think make sure that you really want to build a business and not just some features or a product. I'd say that's like the best advice I can give. If you just kind of want to build an app and see what happens, maybe that's more of like a hobbyist thing rather than going to raise venture funding to do it. Mm-hmm. But if you really have the stomach to kind of become a founder and build a business and go through the ups and the downs, let's be very clear, it's both, then I think that the best thing I can say is like really, really stand behind your idea. Do your best to have a differentiated approach compared to the competitors in the market, and understand that it is not always going to be up and to the right, so to speak. You're going to have fits and starts as a team, as a business, with your board members, with your investors, etc. I think it's very easy to read a bunch of headlines and think that it's just like one day I started a company and the next day we went public, and the reality is it is incredibly much more of a roller coaster than that.
I've been on the other side of that. It is not that bad.
Fair enough. So that's I'd say the best advice I can give.
Yeah. Anything else, Philip, you want to go over with AV while we're here? Or?
No, I would just say for anyone who's interested, definitely do check out the website, atlassian.com/ventures. As I mentioned, there's a whole host of information on there. There's an email address on there you can reach out to as well. And if you do have any questions, please do contact us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, by us he means,
yes,
I can't help you.
Fair enough. Well, yes, we'll see. I don't know. Maybe you can one day. But no, I'd also want to thank you, Robert. This has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to share information. And I really do. I hope folks who end up watching this will end up reaching out. Look forward to hearing from folks.
Thank you so much for the time.
Absolutely, dude. Thank you, dude. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Absolutely.